I started working nights at the rail yard in Havre, Montana, during early November. At first, it was the usual grind, quiet, cold, and mostly uneventful. But after a few shifts, I began noticing a pattern I couldn't explain. I'm a night switchman. My job is to monitor the trains, make sure the cars are properly aligned for departure, check the signals, and log any equipment issues. Havre is a small railroad town, surrounded by flat plains and low hills. The yard itself is huge, tracks stretching in every direction, grain hoppers and boxcars parked in long rows, and a scattering of maintenance sheds with lights that glow weakly against the dark sky. During November nights, the wind cuts across the tracks, and the distant mountains sometimes disappear into low clouds. My shift starts at 10:30 p.m. and ends at 6:30 a.m. I arrive in my coveralls and reflective vest, gloves, and a heavy jacket. I spend the first hour checking the signals, walking along the tracks, listening for the hum of idling engines, and recording temperatures and equipment readings. For the first week, nothing unusual happened. The occasional freight train rolled through. The yard dogs barked somewhere in the distance. The lights flickered with the wind. It was routine, predictable. Then I noticed him. The first time I was walking along track 12, checking a line of boxcars, when I saw a man standing between two locomotives about 300 feet away. He wasn't walking, wasn't signaling anyone. Just standing. Head down slightly, hands in his pockets. I froze for a moment, thinking maybe it was another worker, but no one else was on the tracks. When I looked again a minute later, he was gone. No footprints in the frost-covered gravel, no sound of footsteps, nothing to indicate he had been there. I shrugged it off. The yard is big. People occasionally trespass and shadows play tricks in the lights. But the next night, he appeared again. Same location, same posture. I was starting my first round, logging the condition of the switch points, when I caught him out of the corner of my eye. I turned and nothing. The frost-covered gravel looked undisturbed. After a few nights, I started timing his appearances. They weren't random. He only showed up during the first hour of my shift, and only on nights when the wind was calm and the yard lights were steady. When the wind gusted or a train passed, he never appeared. And he never moved toward me or the equipment. He just stood perfectly still, facing the same stretch of tracks. I began noting details. Date, time, wind, temperature, visibility, whether he appeared. I even started carrying a small notebook with me on rounds. Sometimes, while I was recording track numbers or engine IDs, I'd glance up and see him in the distance, exactly as I had the previous nights. He never approached, never spoke. Just stood. After a couple of weeks, I started noticing minor changes in the yard during his appearances. A loose panel on a maintenance shed would be slightly ajar, a rail switch handle slightly shifted, a cone leaning differently than the previous day. Tiny things, nothing that affected operations, nothing anyone else would notice. But every time he appeared, one or more of these small anomalies would coincide. When he wasn't there, everything stayed exactly as it had been. One night, I tried to get a closer look. I walked toward him, keeping a wide berth, thinking maybe I could identify him or at least see a face. By the time I had closed about 50 feet, he was gone. I scanned the area carefully. No footprints, no tracks in the frost, no signs of a person leaving. It was as though he had vanished into the air itself. I mentioned it to my daytime supervisor casually once. He laughed. Probably a drifter or some kid messing around, he said. I didn't argue. There was no proof. No footprints, no security camera footage. Just my own observations. As weeks passed, the figure's behavior remained consistent. He always appeared during the first hour in the same general spot, and disappeared before I reached the second switch or the maintenance sheds on the far end of the yard. I started planning my rounds around his presence, unconsciously avoiding his location until my second lap. I noticed the lights seemed a little dimmer when he appeared, as if his presence subtly absorbed them, and the faint mechanical hum of the yard felt a little hollow. One particularly cold night in December, I saw him appear along with another figure, smaller, closer to the grain hoppers. Both were perfectly still, facing the same direction, aligned with the tracks. I stopped moving, watched from 30 feet away. I counted minutes, then tens of minutes. When I finally resumed my rounds, they had vanished. No footprints, no signs of anyone being there. After that, I started keeping a handheld camera with me, recording while I did my rounds. The footage, when I reviewed it the next morning, showed nothing. No figures, no movement. Occasionally, I could see subtle changes. Small gravel piles slightly shifted, cones moved a few inches, a faint indentation in the frost, but nothing concrete. Nothing a normal person would notice without knowing exactly where to look. By late January, the appearances became less frequent. Some weeks he appeared 2 or 3 nights. Other weeks not at all. But when he did appear, the subtle environmental changes were more pronounced. A slight wobble in a rail switch, the faintest metallic vibration underfoot, a panel on a shed slightly misaligned. The yard, which I had known intimately for months, felt just a little off during those nights. I stopped approaching him entirely. I stopped trying to record him. I simply observed from a distance, noted whether he appeared, and logged the subtle environmental differences. I never saw him interact with anything, never saw a car or vehicle, never heard a sound that could be attributed to him. Only the faint shift in the ordinary things around him, and his perfect stillness. The last time I saw him was in early February. The air was still, the frost thick, and the yard unusually silent. I was doing my first round, checking a stretch of track near the maintenance sheds. And there he was, exactly where I had come to expect him, standing as he had every other night, facing the same stretch of tracks. I watched for 15 minutes. Then he vanished. The yard returned to its usual rhythm. Light steady, mechanical hum consistent. No sign that anyone had been there. I haven't seen him since. The yard operates normally. Trains run on schedule. Signals blink and switch properly. But I still find myself glancing at that stretch of track during night shifts, expecting him to appear. Sometimes, when the wind is calm and the hum of the yard is steady, I swear I notice the faintest distortion in the shadows, as if something is observing me, perfectly still, waiting for the right conditions to reappear. I don't know who he was, why he appeared only on certain nights, or why the yard and its machinery seemed to respond to his presence. I don't know if anyone else has ever noticed him. All I know is that for a few months he existed in a precise pattern, tied to the rhythms of the rail yard, and I was the only one who saw him. I continue my shifts. I still log track inspections, monitor switches, and check the signals. And sometimes, when everything seems quiet and perfectly routine, I glance at that stretch of frost-covered track and see the shadow of someone, or something, standing at the edge of the lights. Waiting.